This is my journey, inspired one story at a time. A library of leaders was created. It began as a journey to learn. As time went on, it began to grow. All it needed was a platform, and this podcast was created to listen, to inspire, to share. I am a storyteller, and this is my journey. Welcome to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. I'm your host, Steve Anderson, and today our guest is Eric Termuende, who helps organizations build teams that thrive in tomorrow's workplace. As co-founder of Now of Work and the author of Rethink Work and a thought leader on the future of work, Eric has spent years researching what drives high-performing organizations forward. With over 500 speaking engagements across nearly all industries and research involving thousands of employees and hundreds of category leading organizations like Amazon, Coca-Cola, IBM, Zoom, and Toyota, Eric provides leaders with practical frameworks for navigating what's next. His core belief: when we build better teams, we create better work experiences and stronger organizations for the future. Recognized as an American Express Top 100 Emerging Innovators, Eric delivers actionable insights that empower organizations to prepare for 2035 today. Thanks for being here, Eric. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Thanks for having me, Steve. Looking forward to the conversation today.
So let's start with a little context. Just go ahead and tell us kind of where you grew up and kind of your early life experiences and how you kind of got to what you're doing today.
I'm a small town Rocky Mountains guy who grew up in Canada, in the southeast corner of British Columbia, our westernmost province, and grew up in that small town feel where you'd go to the grocery store and you know most of the people there. There's one high school in my city, and I would say that that's probably the first thing that people say about me. Is that you must be from a small town, aren't you?
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's a compliment or a slight, but I pretend that it's a compliment just to give them benefit of the doubt. But I would say that with that, there isn't really like a performative sort of ego side in small towns. I think we're just looking to make the world a better place for the people around us, and that's kind of the house and the family that I grew up in, and some of the values that I bring with me moving forward too.
So in your professional career, then, did you go to the university and then come out and kind of tell us what your first few positions were and where
Yeah.
you ended up
I mean,
now?
at the risk of shooting myself in the foot, I graduated from the University of Calgary and couldn't get a job. I was vice president of the student union, vice president of the student clubs, had reasonable resume, and by resume I mean GPA or transcript, and just wanted sort of that entry level job. Call it a $30,000, $20,000, consultant, very entry level. And unemployment rate was could have been 8 or 9%. I went to Calgary, which is kind of like Oklahoma City or Dallas or something like that, very much an oil and gas town,
Uh-huh.
and oil was $35 a barrel. Companies were slashing jobs left, right, and center. It was really hard to get a job at that point. And on the flip side, the millennial conversation was alive and well. How do we attract and retain millennials? Why are they uh, disengaged? Why are they only sticking around for 6 months and then moving on to the next thing? Job hopping was alive and well. Like, there was a lot of dynamics that were happening in the workplace that allowed my co-founder and I at the time to see an opportunity that maybe we could start an organization that helped great organizations attract and retain talent. And that's
Hmm.
exactly what we did. So we started our company. This would have been back in 2013, 2014, and we built a tool that quantified workplace culture. So we put numbers behind the employee experience. So let's just say if you're looking at, big four consulting, let's just say EY, PwC, KPMG, and Deloitte. On the outside looking in, like, these are very similar companies that do something almost identical to each other. But what we found is that when you start to map out how many emails people get, how many hours are on the phone, how many times they're working independently versus with a team, remotely or in the office, when you put numbers behind that employee experience, you started to understand that there were some pretty significant cultural nuances that separated these organizations. And look, Steve, I mean, you might have been a perfect fit at Deloitte and I might have hated it. I might have been a perfect fit at PwC and you might have hated it, depending on the culture and the experience. And so when we ran this diagnostic tool across industry associations and surveyed thousands of people, we found that organizations were very much competing for skills, for sure. We're all looking for bookkeepers or folks in accounting or salespeople or, administrators, whatever it might be. But we found that often you're not competing for talent. I've got a perfect example. My wife right now works at Lululemon, and most folks know of Lululemon, the
Yeah.
yoga pants, of course.
Yeah.
Very wellness progressive, focused. Another company though that's based here in Vancouver is Arc'teryx. Some of you might know
Yeah.
Arc'teryx is like the
Yeah.
Gore-Tex winter
Out and
coats
stuff.
and
Yeah.
things like
Hmm.
that.
Yeah.
Both of these organizations are looking for pattern designers. They're both looking for administrators. They're both looking for HR folks. But I got to tell you, the Christmas party at Arc'teryx is about pulling your camper vans and RVs and trailers and tents up to a ball diamond, having a big bonfire, and going ice climbing. I can tell you
Yeah.
right now, the folks at Lululemon, they're not doing that.
Yeah.
They've
Right.
got candles and yoga mats and nice warm cozy toques and
Yeah.
leg warmers and stuff like that. Look, neither of these are bad places to work, but they might be a bad place to work if that's not what you're into as a potential
Sure.
employee. So I think that starts to articulate some of the work that we were doing is that if you can better understand the working environment that you're getting into before signing the employment contract, the idea is that you could stay at a better place for you longer and it would be mutually beneficial for the employee and the employer. So to
Yeah.
round out the story, we surveyed a lot of folks, helped industry associations and their members attract and retain talent. And we started speaking about it, how to attract and retain talent, how to lead high performing teams, how to navigate this future of work from a cultural and leadership standpoint. And now I'm close to 600 sort of keynotes later, and loving the work that I get to do.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, your example of the two companies, it gets back to you got to find your people, right? Not
100%.
everyone's
Yeah,
the
100%.
same, and you got to find out where you mix.
The funny thing is people say we've got a great culture. And I'm like, oh, cool. For who? You know? Because
Yeah,
a great culture is so subjective. You look at a real estate brokerage, let's just take Colliers, and this is not specifically Colliers or Cushman or CBRE or whoever. But some of these organizations will cut the bottom 10% of performers. It's a very dog eat dog competitive environment.
yeah,
That's not for me. Yet
right.
you get other organizations who say we're a family. We treat each other like family. I'm like, oh God, please don't. I don't want that either. So
Yeah,
depending on what a good culture is for you and what a good culture is for the people that you're looking to attract, finding your people it's a much more conscious and intentional effort than just being on a great places to work list, which by the way is really important. It means a lot. It's a ton of hard work, but if you're on a great place to work list, I would really encourage you to understand who you're a great place to work for.
for sure.
The last thing I'll say on that, Steve, is that the best place to work, according to Fortune this year, on their 100 best places to work, is the Hilton hotel chain. The third best place to work is Cisco. And I don't think somebody that's making a bet at a Hilton wants to work at a server room in Cisco. But
Yeah.
yet, these are the best places to work in the country, which deserve awards and accolades and kudos and praise. And they also have to be able to articulate who your best place to work for.
So I'm intrigued with your in the bio 600 speaking engagements, keynotes. That's a lot. How do you get on that circuit? And is it just kind of so easy to do right now where you just go and do it, or do you have to prepare for each one? Tell me a little bit about that
I've got
experience.
some.
And,
I don't
and
know.
also,
I've got some of the name tags from this year's events. I keep them all, so I got a big, kind of shoebox. I had a wall full of them before, but
yeah,
it's speaking is a fascinating business. It functions very similar to sort of acting, in that I am represented by bureaus and agencies with a series of agents that represent me. So, I'm very, very grateful for those partners. I wouldn't be where I am without them. I owe them uh, my mortgage. I owe them, the food that I put on my plate for my family at the end of the day, because they're my salespeople, they're my partners, they're my friends, and they put me in front of these incredible clients that I'm so grateful to work for. But Steve, if someone says, let's just say, Dell says, hey, we're looking for we're really struggling with the resilience and navigating the future of work. Is there anyone that you might recommend that can talk a little bit about leadership and culture and uncertainty and how we can build a team that can navigate this stuff? And my agents will say, hey, that kind of sounds like something Eric could do. I'll put Eric and four more folks who can also do a really good job at this in a
yeah,
sort of proposal. Dell will take a look at sort of the speaking reels and the websites and sort of like the one pagers, and they'll say, hey, I like the looks of Eric and this other gal. Let's have a call with them. I'll get on a call with them. If I can wow them in the 30 minutes that I've got to sort of say how I would approach this, then I might land myself a gig in Indianapolis, next September or something like
Yeah,
that.
that's great. So if you
It's
don't mind me asking, I'm just curious. So do you do that? Is that a major source of your income, or do you do that to get exposure so that you get hired by these companies to come in and do your consulting and coaching type of things?
So I sold the company. Actually, I'm not a part of it anymore. I realized that I love the presenting side of things. I love the keynote speaking side of things. And one thing that no client wants you to do when you're up on stage is sell them on
Right,
anything. And
right.
so when I was just starting, especially this is about a decade ago now, I was really worried about having the perception of trying to sell people on stage, which is not the case. And sure, some people come up after and say, can you help us with this thing? And yeah, so yeah, of course we can. But
Yeah.
I don't want them to feel that there's some sort of package they're trying to buy after. So now speaking is a full-time job. I'm working in pretty much every industry and sector and size. It's look at the last few name tags here. This is like long haul trucking, landscaping, tech, recruitment, credit unions, banks, architects, engineers, entrepreneurs, fleet management, community management. I mean, pretty much every industry there's some exposure to, and a speaker's least favorite question is who's your perfect audience, because your speaker wants to say everyone's my perfect audience, to which your person you're talking to rolls your eyes and says this guy's no idea what he's talking about. So I've rephrased it. My perfect audience is not an industry or a sector or a size of an organization. My perfect client or perfect audience is a group of people who are looking to build a team that can navigate the uncertainty of the future of work. And that is pretty much industry agnostic. And I'm able to help organizations do just that.
Probably not a whole lot different than being in a rock band, right? So you you gotta go to these different cities, you
Yep.
gotta perform, you've gotta, engage with the audience. There's that
Yep.
back and forth. I suspect you're on an airplane a fair amount.
Yeah, I just checked. I just had my 114th flight this year yesterday, and
Wow.
so it's a busy time for sure. I would say though, yeah, I actually often describe it very similarly. Let's just say, I don't know, one of the big artists right now is Coldplay's on tour.
Yeah.
Coldplay, they've got their greatest hits, the ones that everyone wants you to play, but they also have a library of songs. Some are, they'll bring them out every once in a while, and some they won't play for years. But they're also building to that catalog, to that library of tunes, and they'll pull out, a 20, 25 song set list and deliver it depending on which city they're in. I've got some of my messages that I really think are consistent that I really want my audiences to hear for sure. But I'm always doing research, always trying to get new songs, new stories that I can build to that set list. And the idea is that as my career goes on, that the library of songs and stories and set lists that I can put together just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And depending on how the audience wants me to customize something, I'll go either get new material or pull from this library of content that I can sort of put something together for them for.
I would imagine also, depending on the audience, if you're doing a conference with engineers or accountants, it's probably much different than, people in the recreational outdoor gear group,
Mm.
So I would imagine that you have to, be aware of that. And also, if you're going to engage with them, you might have to change, maybe how you present it, or maybe even some of the material that you are presenting.
So 100% yes. And I've also found that people are people are people are people, and everyone loves to, laugh a little bit, smile a little bit, learn a little bit. So I just did an engineering event last week, and the question that I like to ask my clients as I sort of gear my material towards them, it's like on a scale of Harvard to Hollywood, one being Harvard, 10 being Hollywood, Harvard being full of case studies, trends, charts, graphs, data, numbers, very academic. Hollywood being lots of stories, lots of laughs, lots of fun, not void of meaningful content and information. Where do you want this to land? And not surprisingly, the engineers are wanting it closer to the Harvard, and the HR folks are wanting it closer to Hollywood. And
Yeah.
that just goes back to this whole culture kind of conversation we were talking about, and the style of the presentation. There's no better or worse, but you can align better with an audience for sure. I will say though that the most customization, content aside, comes from the room that day itself, because maybe the governor was on before me and maybe she talked 20 minutes too long or 20 minutes too short, or maybe the break, went too long, or maybe the room is 94 degrees, or maybe it's 44 degrees, or maybe they've served lunch, or maybe the speaker before me was amazing, or maybe the speaker before me was terrible.
Yeah.
um, and the pivot on the fly, real time, to be able to share a message rather than present a message is something I'm probably more proud of,
Yeah.
because yeah, I can tell you, and this is no slight to anyone in the industry, but gosh, 3 out of 5 events have something that doesn't go perfectly right, from a timing or lighting or technology, or something goes not wrong, but something just is just off of what it was supposed to be. And I think that a good speaker delivers their material, a great speaker delivers their material within the parameters that they're given at that moment when they expect it at the very least.
Well, I think it just with 600 presentations, you definitely got your 10,000 plus hours in, and I'm sure that you're very experienced in that. So probably easier for you to make that shift than somebody who's just starting out. So
Well, I think you said it best. Like anyone who's looking to play basketball and you just dribble the ball for the first time, it gets easier and easier the more time you spend. I just like last week, for example, I thought I was going on for 60 minutes. The client said, "Can you do 90?" Oh, sure. Whatever you want. Yeah, yeah, of course. A little workshop element that's kind of cut it up in the middle. Let's get people rolling up their sleeves. Yeah, let's do it. And they said, "All right, you're up." Okay, let's make it happen. And it was good. It was good. That's the kind of stuff that is really fun now. It's being able to deliver, when the setting isn't exactly what you expected it to be.
without naming names, give me a real life example of going into a situation like that that just did not go well, just kind of was a disaster, and how did you overcome?
How much time do we have? A couple that come to mind. They're both kind of funny. I had a big.
Eric, hold on just a second. I totally your audio just went out there.
Are we good?
When, okay, now it's back.
Okay, so I'll just say, how much time do we have?
Yes, okay, start from there.
Okay, how much time do we have?
Yeah, oh no, we got time. Go ahead.
Okay,
Let's hear a
a,
few.
a couple come to mind, that are particularly standouts. The first one was in a convention center underground. So you convention center enthusiasts can maybe narrow it down to a few because there aren't that many that are underground. It doesn't matter. It was in Toronto. I'm not gonna, there's no fault to any of these really. And I was halfway through my keynote, and through the loading dock, I guess, a little squirrel had snuck in and started running through the front rows of the of the of
Oh
the,
no.
of the audience,
Uh,
and people were screaming and shrieking like this little, like, furry rat was basically running around. And the
uh,
MC of the event got two of the lids from the buffet,
yeah.
and started running around as if they were cymbals and scaring the squirrel out the back door.
Oh my
So
gosh.
that one's a pause for sure, and a recalibration. Another one, though, that was during the pandemic. I was doing a virtual event, and the organizer said, "We've got a surprise planned for the audience right before you're up. It's only 15 minutes or so." I said, "Do you mind telling me about the surprise just so I can sort of gear for it?" And she said, "No, we'd rather you'd be a surprise for you too." So, okay.
Okay.
And 15 minutes before I was up, she said, "Okay, everyone, it's time for the surprise. The surprise is that we're going to do a pet beauty pageant." So, okay, what? So everyone in their house, there's like 500 people in this virtual event, went and got Snoopy and Whiskers and their parakeets and everything else, and they brought them up to the camera, and they had this judging panel, and everyone was introducing their pets, and the winner got a $500 Pet Smart gift card or something like that. I got to tell you, man, this was a smashing success. It went for like 45 minutes. And meanwhile, they're in the green room, like, "Hey, do you mind cutting your presentation down so we can get back on track?" So I went from 60 minutes down to 24 minutes because
Oh
of the
gosh.
success of this. I can tell you, I've been on stages with governors and senators and prime ministers and everything else. Nothing was a harder act to follow than Snoopy and the winning of the $500 PetSmart gift card. How can I compete with a golden retriever? Um, look, you've had tech failures, you've had power go out. There everything that can happen will happen, and you just got to roll with it, man. Like, that's just part of the deal.
That's great. Thanks for sharing those. Let's get into a little bit more of the context of what you're doing with people now, and building better teams. And we
Yeah.
talked about earlier. You said where do people like to work? They got to find their people. So what do you tell or what do you advise people that what makes a great team, and how do you get there? Because I think it's easy to agree that when the team is working well on all cylinders and everyone's doing their job and there's a lot of collaboration and interaction, things are going well. But I,
Sure.
I don't think that's as common as we'd hope it would be.
It's not. And I think one of the big reasons for that is just because the world is moving faster than it ever has before. I mean, we are more distracted, and our attention is being fought for harder than it ever has been before. And I think only a fraction as to what it will be in the weeks, months, and years to come. And what I found sort of builds off the research of Patrick Lencioni. I mean, I want to give credit where credit's due. He
Mhm.
says the foundation of the highest performing teams is a foundation of trust.
Right.
And that's the one message that comes through in all of my keynotes is we have to have a team that trusts each other. And trust is imperative because what comes after trust is the ability to have dissent and conflict with each other. But you can't have dissent and conflict if we haven't built that foundation of trust first. Now, some people think, well, conflict in the workplace is a bad thing. And I would tell you that social conflict in the workplace is a bad thing. Bullying, gossiping, being rude, talking behind each other's backs. There's no time for that. But intellectual conflict is a prerequisite to innovation and creativity and doing things different than the way we've always done it before. And that is a requirement in this current and future state of work. If we can extract the full potential of our teams, um, we're not going to be able to navigate this future of work. In fact, I just saw a study this morning. I don't know if I want to be like quoted on this. Let's think of this as just like a rough number because I didn't check the sources on it. But it was like people over 65, only 15% of them use LLMs like ChatGPT and things like that. Yet college students use it nonstop to cheat on their exams. I mean, study for their exams and
Yeah,
things
yeah,
like
there
that,
you go.
right?
Yeah.
Um, but if the 65-year-old is not leveraging the efficiency and the effectiveness of the 20-year-old, there is a huge gap between the two. I mean, yes, the 65-year-old has wisdom and experience and context and understanding and all of the things that are so imperative, so imperative. But I would also guess that that 20-year-old can do certain things in a fraction of the time, that other person can. And I think the power of the two of them together is pretty much unstoppable. Yet we talk about generational gaps and differences and things like that. I just think that there's an education gap or a communication gap between these two. And if we do understand and empathize with each other a little bit more, and are able to trust each other a little bit more, I believe the combination of these, I don't know, 5, 6, 10. It seems like there's always more generations in the workforce than there was last week, but the combination of these generations would make teams and organizations pretty unstoppable.
And trust is such an important thing. I think we can all agree on that, and having that is not a given. You have to work at it. You have to develop it in a certain way because in this world we're in right now, there's so much distrust and there's so much worry about I might offend you or I might say something that you're going to
Yeah.
get, upset about or whatever. So how do we do that?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm sure we could write, you write a book on that, but how do
Yep.
you get trust? How do you build trust over time in an organization or a executive team
Sure.
that really is a lasting way?
There's a concept I heard from Brene Brown recently. She called it the marble jar theory. And
I've
the
heard
faster
that.
you
Yeah.
can fill up that jar with marbles, the marbles representing elements or fractions of trust, the more we can trust people with the bigger things around us. Now, think of each marble as a positive interaction. You ask about your kids, you ask about your dog, you ask about your husband or your wife, you ask about how your weekend was. Each one of those is a marble. Anytime you do a favor or offer, anytime you give more than you take, that's another marble. And I also heard someone say that we should treat relationships almost like our bank accounts, you know.
Yeah.
And it was funny because you got to be careful when you talk about bank accounts because it seems like it's transactional. That's not really the message I'm trying to
Yeah.
send. I'm just saying that the more you can make deposits,
Yeah, the
The more
deposit
wealth
withdrawal.
you're going to
Yeah.
have. But I also think about like compounding interest and things like that. The more money in the bank account, the more you're going to make in interest too. So between the marbles and the bank theory and the little interactions that we have with each other along the way, I think the better we can build trust. In fact, I had a sort of funny thought the other day. I said trust is actually a lot like gas station sushi. Okay, now you got to work with me on this one.
Okay.
I'm from Vancouver. We have a supreme knowledge of sushi here, a huge Asian influence. I'm like this close to mercury poisoning, like an inch away from mercury poisoning, which is an
Okay.
entirely different conversation. But I've become a real connoisseur of sushi. And I walked into the gas station the other day, feeling pretty, hungry, and I saw it there in the cooler. That gas, it's not really a cooler, by the way. It's like fairly warm, but I saw the gas station sushi in the cooler. And it stopped me in my tracks, Steve. I got to tell you, I'm looking at this stuff and I'm thinking, gosh, that looks really good. And for $3.99, what a steal. You know what I mean? Now, did I get the sushi? Of course not. I wouldn't be able to have
Oh.
this conversation with you today if I did get the sushi. We all know why. But I'm walking out of the gas station. I'm thinking to myself, why didn't I get that sushi? And I came to conclude that I didn't get the sushi because I didn't know anything about it. And because I didn't know anything about it, I didn't trust it. It could have been in there for 5 minutes or 5 days. It could have been caught fresh in the harbor, whipped up by the resident sushi chef in the back of the gas station, placed there just for me, or it could have been frozen and thawed and frozen and thawed and trucked in from the Atlantic coast. I didn't know. And because I just didn't know, I just couldn't trust it. And that sort of light bulb moment happened for me. I realized this is the same thing that happens at work, isn't it? Our people have the skills, the requirements, the education, the qualifications. They look great. But does that mean that we trust them right away? And the answer, of course, is no, because we have to build trust, earn trust, gain trust. And that's fine. I'm not saying you have to shortcut anything. But what I am saying is that when you get to know our people at work a little bit better outside of work, you can absolutely work better together at work too.
Well, I think you also brought in their biases too, and how strong biases are because if you're talking about your sushi example, you're thinking, well, if it's not in kind of a really nice, clean, minimalist environment with an Asian person back there, making the
Sure,
sushi, you'd
sure,
question it. Here
sure.
I am in my wine cellar, and I think, oh, if I come across a wine that looks interesting and it's like $20 a bottle or less, I'm going to think,
Mhm.
well, that can't be good,
Yeah,
but,
sure.
but it could be,
Yeah,
so we have these biases
right.
that really fuel all that, and I'm intrigued when you said. So obviously I'm a lot older than you are, and I can remember back in the day where it used to be, okay, don't get to know your people too well. Don't ask them any personal things. Don't ask them, whatever. And I couldn't, and the way that I lead and the way that I led when I ran my company, it was like, I can't do that. I have to get to know people. I have to, ask them about things. And the more I know about them, so just what you said, the better I think we do. But there used to be a feeling that was intrusive or violating someone's privacy. So do you think our world is changing in that sense, that it's more accepted that we can go to that level?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not talking from experience, but I am talking from, anecdotal research. And that the evolution of work, I think, has been pretty interesting. Work used to be something you do from 9 to 5. It was a job. And it's not that work isn't that now, it's just that the boundaries have kind of blurred, haven't they? I mean,
Yeah.
most of us have our work on our phone 24 hours a day. The first thing you do when you roll over is you check social media and your email. Um, but in that time, loneliness has skyrocketed, depression, anxiety, mental health issues are all on the rise. And despite being in a more connected world than we've ever been in before, the world's never been this disconnected before. And so, even when you look at some of the statistics around young men, more young folks, men especially, are living in their parents' basement longer than they ever have before, have fewer sexual partners, have fewer best friends, have fewer friends, fewer confidants altogether. And I think as work and more importantly, the technology in our hands has evolved, the need to be able to create friendships along the way has also increased. And so, where work was something you did until you could go to church, until you could go to your community groups, until you could go do things with people after work, it's almost like it's almost like it's switched. It's almost now like work is the place where you could do those sort of community centered things. Church attendance is down more than it ever has been before. Community involvement, young people playing sports. a lot of these things are down. And so again, I'm not talking about hard numbers and research here, but if you ask the question, I think work is in many ways the community spot now, not to compromise on productivity or efficiency or anything like that. But I would argue almost the opposite is the same. The more community, the more sense of belonging we have, the more effective and productive we're going to be. Would you agree?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I've told this story often, but it's a good one. So I was the CEO of this company, and we hired, I was not involved in the hiring process of a fairly low-level person, but she was in a cubicle not far from my office. And so when the first day they introduced me to her, and I said hi and was nice and so on. But then every time I would walk out of the office, I would walk right by her cubicle.
Mm,
And I'd say hi and whatever, but it just felt weird and shallow and surfacey. So one day I walked by there and I grabbed a rolling chair and I rolled it right into her cubicle and I said, "Hey, tell me a little bit about yourself. I noticed that you have a bicycle here in the cubicle, and do you ride and what do you do?" And it freaked her out. I mean, it
mm,
was like the look on her face, but then we got to having a little conversation. Things went well. And then I found out that the bicycle that she had in her cubicle had a flat tire. And she
mm,
told me that, well, my husband kept saying he's going to fix it, but gosh darn, he never did. And so I haven't been able to ride it for a while. So I went home as a fellow cyclist, the next day, got my pump, came in the next morning, pumped up her tire, and she's looking at me like I was crazy. But that little interaction, I'm telling you, I had the biggest fan ever there, that she was just always smiling and always saying hi and engaging. And, just
mhm.
little things like that make such a difference.
So why don't we do that more often? What prevents that? Because, in everything that I found too, it's not the Starbucks gift cards, it's not the pizza parties, it's not the retreats. I mean, sure, it can be all of those
Right.
things too, but I've always said that perks and benefits attract talent, experience keeps it. But why aren't more people doing what you did? Why aren't more people bringing their metaphorical bike pumps to work?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I don't know. I think I don't know. That's a really good question because my style is that, I look for things to do that and I look for interactions like that. And I know from my experience of the story I just told that when you do that,
Mhm.
talk about deposits in a bank. You've
Sure.
got deposits in there for a long time. That person is likely to do anything you ask them to because, you got some deposits in there.
Well, it's interesting to say that. One of the good lines I heard is that sometimes one of the best ways to gain trust is to give it first,
Yeah,
is
yeah.
to offer something. And, I love the idea of, I think, very Vaynerchuk says that as well too, give first, ask second. And yeah, I think that's a great, easy concept to play by.
In doing a little research for this talk today, I found that you had said before that, like when you ask people, why do you love working here? Or what is it that you love? You always get the same answer. So just share us your experience with that.
And it's so incredible. I've had 5 events in the last 8 days. Um, One was for landscape. I mean, I just kind of read some of them, but one was for, well, let's go back. One was for recruitment. The next was for municipalities. The one after that was fleet management. The one after that was architects and engineers. And the one after that was like landscaping, sort of PE backed landscaping firm.
Hmm.
And I asked the question in every single one of those audiences. I said, "What do you love most about the work you get to do?" And I sort of disguised it in a story of somebody else sharing the work that they loved and why they loved what they get to do. And I got to tell you, every time I ask this question, the response that I get is always the same, and it's always just 2 words. I'm gonna put you on the spot. What do you think the thing that people love most about the work they get to do is? The 2 words.
The people that you do it with.
People. Isn't
Yeah.
that, isn't that, isn't that crazy? I mean, I didn't narrow it down other than saying the 2 words. And Steve, like you said, is the same thing I've heard. I don't know how many thousand times now. The thing that people love most about the work they get to do is the people. And I found that this is the biggest illuminator of the imperatives and the focus when it comes to the future of work. If the people are the thing we love most about the work we get to do, should we not invest a little bit of time, not necessarily even resources, not necessarily financial elements, to get to know these people a little bit more? If we love them so much, but we don't know why they ride their bike or what's important to them or what their family's names are, what's the point? What's the point?
So, being a Canadian, are you more of a soccer guy or a American football person?
I would say I'm probably more of American football, not Canadian football, though. I'm not a
Yeah.
fan of the CFL, even
So
much
the
less.
reason I asked you the question is, I like football as well, and getting back to your talent and how these cultures develop that talent, and
Yeah.
you see a couple football teams like in the NFL. And year after year after year, they spend a boatload of money. They have amazing talent, and they just don't win. I mean,
Hmm.
it's like they can't get it together. And then you see these other teams that maybe have less talent, but they have this team culture and this team
Hmm.
synergy, and they
Hmm.
win consistently year after year after year. Or they come into the league at the beginning of the season with no one expects them to do anything, and the next thing you know, they're at the top of their conference. So I
Yep.
do think there's such a thing about cultures that, as you said earlier, talent may be hard to find, but I often wonder if maybe it's not so much the talent. You can find good talent, but it's how you bring that talent out of people and they reach their potential.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I'm the person to speak on, NFL and how, the winning recipe, what the winning recipe is. But one of the stories that stands out to me was actually a story from the Philadelphia 76ers around a coaching story. And I'll share it with you really quickly. It was back
Sure.
in 2015, the Philadelphia 76ers were 10 and 72. Not only were they dead last in the East, they were dead last in the entire NBA.
Yeah.
And Brett Brown was a coach at that time, and the team had lost game after game after game after game after game. And he went in the dressing room and just you couldn't hear a thing, right? There was an ounce of energy in that room until he heard someone in the back of the dressing room scream. And he went back there and he saw that one of the players had put a rubber snake in the gym bag of the other guys. And the way I see it, Brown had two options. Number one, ignore it. That's easy. Number two, win sprints, guys. Tomorrow we can't be screwing around like this. We have to, we're a professional NBA team at the risk of having the most embarrassing season in history. But he took a third option. He said, "That's interesting. How did you know to put a rubber snake in the gym bag?" And I found out, and he said, "Well, I found out that he hates reptiles. I love reptiles." He said, "That's interesting.
Yeah.
There's some sort of connection here." And he said, "Okay, well, I'm going to pair every member of this basketball team up with marketing and communications over the next 3 months. And after a practice or after games, when we have an all-team meeting, I want everyone to do a 10-minute presentation on something that they love outside of basketball." And so this wasn't just to the team, it was to the 250 faculty and staff of the Philadelphia 76ers. They would do this in their auditorium. And one person gave a presentation on tattoos, on the history of tattoos, that his tattoos, what they meant to him, some of his favorites around the world. I know another player gave a presentation on coffee, all the different blends and roasts that he loved, how he had like decaf coffee before bed, and just talked about the history of coffee. And one of the players gave a presentation on reptiles. Sure enough, he talked about his two bearded dragons and brought them in. And he reached into this gym bag and pulled out a 4 foot like boa constrictor and said he wanted to introduce the team to Max, to which the whole team filed to the back of the room. They actually, as far as I know, the 76ers have a defensive drill they call the Max now, where they just run backwards as fast as they can. But something started to happen with this team in that they knew more about each other instead of just what they thought, everyone was one dimensional, just
Yeah.
basketball players. But there was so much more than that. When they got to learn more about their team, they started to play better together. And that next year, they were 52 and 30. They had really nearly flipped the record. They made it to the playoffs, second round of the playoffs, and they made it to the playoffs like 4 years in a row after that. Now, there wasn't a huge personnel change. There were a couple, of course, that are going to come and go every year. But again, when we start to know more about our people outside of this one
Yeah.
dimension that we think we are at work, I think incredible things will start to happen. I think you see this in football. I think you see this in the workplace. I think you see this on any sport team, really.
I couldn't agree more. Let's talk a little bit about the four H's. So tell us what the four H's are. I think this is something that you do often in your keynotes, and tell us
Sure.
a little bit about what they are and how they relate.
Yeah, so Kevin Stefanski was a coach of the Cleveland Browns. If we want to go down the football track, the Cleveland Browns don't really have much to brag about this year nor last year. But this coach, who has not been fired yet, is pretty exceptional. And every time I tell this story, I somehow hear another dimension of Kevin Stefanski that is just glowing, just incredible. But what Stefanski did in 2020, 2021 season is he realized that he knew what his team did. Their roles, their positions, their stats, all those kind of things. But he had no idea who they were. And he realized the inverse was true too, that his team knew what he did as a coach, but he had no idea who he was as an individual, father of three, all this whole backstory. So he
Mhm.
started this drill with the team he called the 4-H drill, and he shared his heroes, his heartbreaks, his hopes, and his history, the 4 H's. And he just shared, the things that were important to him in and outside of football. And when he shared these 4 H's, the team started to lean in a little bit more and maybe relate to or empathize with this coach who again, they knew what he did, but they didn't know who he was. And he started to invite his team to share these 4 H's as well. And people were sharing stories of family members having cancer and overcoming it, family members losing jobs or taking it on a second job, family members who have triumphed, family members who have really struggled, things that they learned, the people they aspire to be, like their hopes, their dreams, their goals, their ambitions. And this, well, let's just put some context here. Cleveland Browns didn't win a single game in 2017. They won one game in 2018. Yet in 2020 and 2021, they won 11 games. They made it to the playoffs for the first time in 17 years, and they won a playoff game for the first time in 28 years. And again, it always comes back to this for me is that when we know our players, when we know our team outside of the work that we get to do, we get to work better, play together, live better together on the field too. And I think the 4 H's is one of my favorite exercises to do just that. Another one that I've built, I call it the 7 windows exercise, like 7 windows into our lives. We talk about our heroes, our hometowns, our hopes, just expanding on those 4 H's, the things that we've learned, what we're most proud of. Uh, it's these things without getting a crowbar out and prying and sort of digging to learn more about the people around us. It's these things that I think make just a significant difference as we're working more than we're spending time with our significant others. We're working more than we sleep oftentimes. And that's just the reality of the work. But if we can enjoy the people, understand them a little bit better, I think we can create a better experience at work too. And by the way, I think this is the foundation of resilience. I think this is the foundation of innovation and creativity. I think this is the foundation of the future of work, if I'm being totally honest.
I couldn't agree more. The one more question on or story on football. I heard you tell a story that an NFL player tore his ACL, and as a physical therapist myself, I love the story. So tell the story about how he went to rehab with his
Well, it
physio
was like I
therapist.
think it was like 2016 or something. He was talking about one of his heartbreaks in this 4-H exercise. He tore his ACL and he thought that his career was over. But, he got paired with this magical physiotherapist who didn't just rehabilitate him to 100%. I would argue he rehabilitated him to 120% because he's better at football today than he was back in 2016. But as he was sharing this with the team, he said, Coach, that's not the best part though. The best part is that I got married 8 months ago and my physiotherapist became the best man at my wedding. I gained a best friend in the process too.
Yeah.
It's just like how like heartwarming is that, how nice is that, how disaster and catastrophe could turn out to be something so positive. But again, you just start to learn that like everyone on the team, like we all have hearts and we all, care about each other, sympathize, empathize about each other. And it just adds so many more dimensions to what could be a single dimension expectation of the people around us that I think is just so valuable.
Yeah, that connection is very, very important. Talk a little bit about here too about I heard you say that the future work that the settings that we're going to be doing that flexibility will be gone. What do you mean by that?
I think you did your research. I appreciate that. I think flexibility is dying a slow death, slower than it probably should. To be very clear for anyone who's defending hybrid or remote, I don't mean either of those things. I just mean that if Steve, you come in Monday, Tuesday, I come in Wednesday, Thursday, Friday because we got a flexible arrangement, and then you sit on Zoom or Teams Monday, Tuesday, talk to me at home, and I sit in the office and sit on Teams and talk to you at home, what's the point in either of us coming in? So I think flexibility from that standpoint will be gone. I think if you and I are in the office on Monday and Tuesday and home on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, great, and frankly, it doesn't matter to me how many days we're in the office. I think that an organization that is most successful are going to be the ones that firmly decide what is the best policy and the best practice for them and attract the people who want a similar experience. I don't think that completely remote is necessarily the best. I don't think that completely in the office is necessarily the best. I don't necessarily think there's any best. But if you want to, if you want to be able to attract and keep, the people that are right for you, you have to be consistent. on that working arrangement or environment, and don't say, okay, well, we're going to be completely remote now, but 6 months from now, we're going to bring you in for one more day and then one more day and then one more day. Because meanwhile, that employee who might be incredible at their job might have moved across the country. And then what? Then what? Do you start making exceptions? But then if you're going to start making exceptions, and now the two people on a three-person team are living across the country, and the other person's forced to come in, I mean, it just causes too much of a headache. So again, I don't care what the arrangement is moving forward. I would just say make sure there's consistency and that the intended effect is certainly going to work as well.
And I think what I get out of that too is that it doesn't have to be the same for everybody. If you really know your
Definitely
people,
not.
you look at the personality types. I mean, I'm the first to say that I'm a bit of a verbal decision maker. So I love the ability to walk into somebody's office and say, "Hey, I've been thinking about this, and what do you think? And what did then?" And through this conversation back and forth, oh, okay, now I get it. This is what we should do. So
That's right.
I like that process, and there's a case to be made that I need that process. But if
Yeah.
no one's ever in the office, or I have to, dial into Zoom to have that kind of conversation, it's probably not going to happen. So I think we have to look at it's okay for one person who's very analytical and maybe loves to sit in the office and do their own thing. They don't have to be treated exactly the same as somebody like me who likes that interaction more.
Mhm. I would also say it might be team based. If you got a marketing or creative team that rolls up their sleeves and goes head to head and debates ideas all day, I mean, that's a little tougher remotely, isn't it? But maybe you've got an accounting team or maybe you've got an individual contributor. We like to think that culture is this like an organization has a culture. It's almost like the United States has a culture, sure, but Washington State and Florida are very, 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 very different, in
Yeah,
almost every way. That doesn't make Florida or Washington State any better, unless you have, of course, a preference, and it is better for you. But I think organizations are very much the same. Like, sure, you can have a culture and mission, vision, values, but a Boise office is going to be different than the Manhattan office for sure, and so is the accounting team is going to be different than the HR or the sales team for sure. None of this is bad, but I think you have to design the future of your workplace accordingly, depending on who it is you're looking to bring in, what the intended results are, and how people can do their best work with the people they do it with.
for sure, for sure. So, in anticipation of our discussion today, is there anything that I haven't asked you or that we haven't covered that you for sure want to get in the program today?
The thing that just stands out for me is I think we've been asking the wrong question about this future of work. For so long we've been asking the question, what does the future look like? And the truth is, Steve, I have no idea. I don't know what the weather is going to do next week. Who am I
Right.
to try and predict what the future of work is going to look like? Everything from ChatGPT and LLMs and artificial intelligence. It's it's almost certainly going to be crazy. The question I think we should be asking instead of what does the future look like is how do we build an incredible team that can navigate whatever the future throws our way. And I think that if we focus on that instead, building a cohesive multi-generational workforce that is diverse and inclusive and recognizes the different perspectives and opinions and experiences of everyone on the team, that we can leverage technology, we can leverage experience, we can leverage the trust and the potential of everyone on the team. And I think if we can do that, the future, I think it's incredibly bright.
It's so true when you look at teams, the word diversity all of a sudden has become a bad word or something that people want to debate and argue about. But if
Yeah,
you look at teams, bringing different experiences, whether they're cultural or whether they're age related, I think those things they're all positive because as soon as someone, that's my age doesn't think that what a young 20 something says has any purpose or any meaning, I'm in trouble, because
that's right.
we can learn a lot from those people. Vice versa, as you
Mhm.
said earlier, you can't buy or look in a book on experience. There's a certain amount of experience that also gives you wisdom. So I think combining those different diversity type inputs should bring, and I think does bring, a better result.
Absolutely. And I think that's it. I think that's the key to the future of work right there.
Yeah. So, Eric, at this point in the interview, I always ask my guests the same common question. And that question is, in relation to leadership, what is a pearl of wisdom that you could leave us with today?
I think that the best leaders that lead the most effective teams are the ones who can create an environment where everyone's voice is seen, heard, and understood. There's an interesting study, and this might sound trivial, but there was this interesting study that came out that said the root of happiness is actually a sense of contribution. And I think when we feel valued and can do things outside of our job title, we feel more important. And I think when leaders make your teams feel important, great things are going to happen. Now, to be very clear, that doesn't mean every idea some knucklehead 20-year-old comes up with has to be implemented. It just has to be heard and understood. And if it doesn't work, it has to become a learning opportunity. And that's not going to move forward. We're not going to move forward with that. And here's why. That's just as effective as bringing that idea forward. So when it comes to leadership, if everyone on the team has a voice and feels important, feels that they can contribute, I think that's a recipe for success.
One of the things that I do is help companies and teams put together leadership development programs. And one of the things that I think is, you think, oh, you got to teach that. And I say, yes. And that's, that active, open listening. You
Yeah.
know, not everyone is good at it. And sometimes
Right.
just sitting back and listen deeply and understand what that person is saying. And maybe, the 10 points, 10 of them are kind of wacko and you don't really get it, but there might be that one that really,
That's right.
oh, okay, that's worth considering. So I think we have to work at that. It's not just a given that we all know how to do that.
100%. 100%.
Well, Eric, this has been a real pleasure. It's great to hear all the work you're doing and your insights, and they mesh with mine very well. So that's always fun to have a guest that I think we're connected on that. But great to know that you're just up the road. I'm just a little west of Seattle, so we're not too far away, and
Perfect.
so we got the West Coast vibe thing going. But I appreciate your time today, and wish you the best of luck going forward.
Enjoy the gloomy, rainy day that we've got here, as we will for the next few months for sure.
We do, we do. Well, we have to
Thank you.
embrace that in a
Yeah.
different way that someone else may look at that and say,
That's
"Oh,
right.
crazy! How can you live in a place
That's
like
right. Yeah, that's right.
that?" Yeah.
Listen, Steve, thanks for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Okay.
Love
Take
to chat.
care.
All
Yeah.
right.
Maybe
Bye bye.
we'll into each other down the road one of these days.
Yeah. All right.
Bye bye. Thank you for listening to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. To listen to all my interviews, subscribe to Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, and many other popular podcast platforms. Some of these interviews are on video, and you can search YouTube for Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson. You can also access the entire library of interviews on my website, orange.coaching.com, and that is orangetheword.coaching.com, and go to the Media Center and click on Podcasts or Video Gallery. You can also enter the website from pilpodcast.com.